Welcome everyone back to weekly weather updates, and in today's video we're going to have a look at the latest from the live radar, run through the weather warnings. So we do have snow and ice warnings still issued. We'll look at the UKV, look at the precipitation and the temperature over the course of the next 5 days, and we'll have a look at wind gusts as well. So it could be getting quite blustery over the course of the next few days, perhaps even quite stormy, and I'm expecting over the course of the next day or two to be seeing some yellow warnings issued for wind, as they could gust up to 60 or 70 miles per hour, and that could be quite disruptive in places. We'll have a look at the long range, look at the GFS, GEM, ECMWF and the ensembles, as it does look fairly westerly over the course of the next week or so. There are signs though, as we head into January, high pressure could return, but in what capacity, we're still yet to be determined. The ECMWF today does actually bring it towards a Scandinavian high, which would produce something colder, but none of the two other runs, the GEM and the GFS, are showing anything remotely close to that. So a lot of uncertainty as we do head into January next week. We'll also be addressing the latest on the potential for a sudden stratospheric warming that could be happening towards the middle of January, perhaps towards the end of January. Timings are a little bit off with this, depending on what model and what ensemble forecast you look at. Now, I have heard rumblings over the course of the past couple of months of the potential, and of course we're at the time of year where that potential does come into play. And over the last few days we have seen signs from the major models that a warming could be taking place, and it could really take a big hit at the stratospheric polar vortex high up in the atmosphere. Now, I'll run through this at the start of the video, and we'll explain what is going on, because of course we probably haven't addressed this for a year or so since last winter. And many people probably are quite new and don't know exactly what this is and what it could do as we head into the second half of winter. It is highly variable, and there is a lot of uncertainty. We are at very early stages of this. A lot of the forecasts here are for sort of 10 to 20 days, so nothing imminent, but the potential is there, and we'll be covering that in today's video. So do remember, if you enjoy my videos, make sure you like and subscribe, and remember to follow me on Twitter as well. The link's in the description. So if you do start on the latest GFS, we're looking at the 10 HPA temperatures, so high up in the atmosphere, many kilometres up. Have a look at the temperatures over the North Pole. Now, inevitably high up in the atmosphere, it's very cold. These purples here are showing temperatures around -70, -80. The reds here, which you'd think would be warm, are showing temperatures of -35. So we are talking in very low temperatures here. Now, generally in the stratosphere during the winter, because over the North Pole it's pitch black for about a month, it gets very cold, not only at the surface but all the way up through the atmosphere. And this cold air we see over the North Pole contrasts with the slightly warmer air. It's still very cold across the mid-latitudes, but it's slightly warmer. And what we get on this big temperature contrast is a big pressure gradient. We get a big low pressure system developing over the North Pole, higher pressure developing towards the mid-latitudes. This is up in the stratosphere, remember, and it drives westerly winds. And those westerly winds can propagate through the atmosphere all the way down to the troposphere level, where our actual weather takes place, and can affect the jet stream and the general flow. So generally, when we have a strong stratosphere, these cold purples here locked up over the North Pole, no real up and downs with this, no real warmings, we generally see a westerly wind, very strong high up in the atmosphere, and it could propagate through the atmosphere and give us strong westerlies at the surface. And that is why generally in the winter we expect a zonal flow in from the west, mainly because of the stratospheric polar vortex. Now, what we can see sometimes is a warming coming up from North America, Canada, up from Siberia, up from Russia perhaps, and that warming could penetrate this cold pool over the Arctic, and it could skew all of those upper level winds. Those could propagate through the atmosphere and allow blocking to develop in the troposphere, and that could leak very cold weather. Now, I don't know, many of you probably know that the beast from the east we saw in 2018 was from a sudden stratospheric warming, but we have seen sudden stratospheric warming since that have developed nothing at all, or just minor cold spells, suddenly tracked jet streams. So there can be very variable conditions from this, but One scenario is very cold weather, and the Met Office have stated from sudden stratospheric warmings, about 50% of the time we do see cold and snowy weather. So if you do see a sudden stratospheric warming, it is something to really keep an eye on, as it can cause something very cold in sort of the month ahead. Now, sudden stratospheric warmings do happen quite often, once every year or two, probably once every 2 years, probably on average. But sometimes they can happen 3 years on the trot and then not happen again for another 3 years. So on average, we see one every 2 years or so, and they're not too uncommon. But when they occur and how strong they occur and what they actually do to the polar vortex can very much affect sort of the positioning of any blocking that develops. Now, we're not going to focus on that because that is more on sort of the minute details once we know a warming is definitely happening. We're going to focus on what the models are showing in terms of the warming, the potential changes in the zonal winds from both the GFS and the ECMWF. So yeah, if we do look at the GFS first, you can see we've got the very cold air locked up in the Arctic, and it's not particularly warm at all. And this is valid of 6 a.m. today. Now, if we do run through this, you can see how that stays cold, not really. It stays pretty circular as well, so it doesn't get too elongated. Sometimes elongation can be a sign that it's about to split or get disturbed. But watch what happens over Siberia to the top right. We see a big warming occurring. Again, it's still minus 20 degrees up in the stratosphere, but it's quite a big warming. And you see the stratospheric polar vortex getting elongated. And right to 384 hours for the 12th of January, we see a big warming coming up from around Alaska, Siberia now, and a strong elongated polar vortex and stratospheric polar vortex here. Now, there's no sun stratospheric warming here, but this could be a precursor to that. The sun stratospheric warming that could happen is something that could happen 15th of January to the 31st. So not in our sort of reliable time frame at all, but it is something to keep an eye on. So the GFS today is showing a significant warming, could disturb the polar vortex, and could lead to a sudden stratospheric warming in the second half of the month. But nothing concrete, because it's not in the 14-day time frame at all, let alone sort of the reliable time frame we generally look at for our surface conditions in sort of 5 to 7 day time frame. Now, if we do go to the ECMWF and have a look at similar charts from the mean anomalies here, these are from the ensembles. So this is not one run, this is the ensemble mean. And the reds here are showing above average temperatures, and the blues here are showing below average. So if you'd expected a very strong polar vortex, you'd think the over the top of the Arctic would be very strong blues. And that's what we're seeing for the valid time here from yesterday until next Monday, the 2nd of January. But what we've got to watch is these darker reds. Now, it's fine having darker reds around sort of the mid-latitudes here. So across parts of Central America, part of Central Europe, not too unusual. But if that did penetrate into the Arctic, and we did see a big warming there, that would be a sign of at least a stratospheric warming, maybe a sudden stratospheric warming. Now, if we do run through these weekly charts, you can see from the 2nd of January to the Monday the 9th, no major warming at all to the stratosphere. It's a little bit more elongated there, but again, no major warming. That's from the 2nd until the 9th. From the 9th until the 16th, it follows similar to the GFS. A major warming starts to take place towards Siberia and Alaska, and starts to properly push into the Arctic from the 16th to the 23rd, and those negative anomalies start to reduce. And watch what happens towards the 30th, right towards the end. Those reds are the only thing that remains. Again, the anomaly is much weaker because it's in the longer range, but this would definitely suggest from the mean ensemble members, we would be expecting a warming, perhaps a sudden stratospheric warming. We can't sort of specify it until we get into the shorter time frame, and right towards the end you don't see a sign of those blues returning for the end of January to the early February. So from the ECMWF, weekly mean anomalies here definitely suggesting a warming, perhaps a major warming, perhaps a sudden stratospheric warming event could take place. Now, if we have a look at another way to view this, is from the ECMWF sort of line charts. Now, these are showing the mean zonal winds. So these are not the temperatures, but the zonal winds are up in the stratosphere. So, you know, how I said earlier in the video, we've got that cold air of the polar area, warmer air towards the mid-latitudes, and we've got a strong westerly flow. These lines are showing how strong that westerly flow is. If we have a sudden stratospheric warming or a significant warming, you'd expect those westerly flows to get very weak, if not towards turn to easterlies for a time, so below the 0 meters per second point. And if we expect a very strong polar vortex like we have now, you expect these blue lines to be 40, 50, 60 meters per second. Now, the forecast for towards mid-January is for quite a strong polar vortex, actually trending towards average. And then we see quite a lot of uncertainty, some going very strong or staying around average, but we have a significant cluster from around the 23rd to early February, which shows a complete reversal in the zonal winds. That includes the operational ECM that we have here from yesterday's bunch of runs. And these are showing negatives of -10, -20, and this would be a precursor to potentially some very cold blocked weather through February. But, of course, it is a minority. Most are generally sort of in the standard deviations here between the two smaller red lines, and that's generally normal. But, of course, some of these ones, even down to sort of 10 to 15, 20 meters per second, are much weaker, and even if it's not a sudden stratospheric warming, at least an attempt at it could weaken the stratospheric winds enough that it allows blocking to take hold in the troposphere. But that's one thing we did have a look at in the winter look-aheads. We definitely thought that second half of the winter, unless we saw sudden stratospheric warming, we would see a very strong polar vortex, and we're actually seeing that right now. Just this attempt from Siberia could change the outcome towards the second half of the winter. I must stress, though, any impacts we see from this would not be felt to the end of January, early February, so 4 weeks away at the earliest. So I must stress, even though this stuff is taking place now, it's coming into sort of the 10 to 14 day time frame in terms of the beginnings of it, we're not expecting any impacts for a number of weeks. Must stress that. So definitely a suggestion here that there is the charts. Now, if we have a look at another chart, this is from the GFS. This is the GFS operational run, so this is only one run, I have to remember that. And it's for the next 14 days, showing the zonal mean winds throughout the atmosphere. So 1 HPA is the top of the stratosphere, 10 HPA is the area we generally look at, all the way down to sort of 850 HPA and 1000 HPA, which is in the troposphere. You can see on the left, these are the actual wind speeds. You can see 70 meters per second, so it's very similar to the last chart we had a look at, but it's just shown a colour gradient and shown throughout the pressure levels. So you can see anything green or lower is getting towards the easterly area, and you can see towards the surface, it's much weaker, and these very strong stratospheric winds have not really propagated through the atmosphere so far this winter, and that's why we saw very cold weather early in the winter, even though the polar vortex was quite strong. Now on the right hand side you can see anomalies, so weaker or stronger than average. So any blues here not suggesting easterly winds, but they are suggesting weaker than average polar vortex. You can see extremely strong at the moment, around 30 meters per second, higher than average, and we saw that on the Eastern VF line chart a minute ago. And you can see towards the surface, sort of in and out, so it's not really propagating much through the atmosphere. But watch what happens towards around the 10th, 11th of January, a big negative anomaly starts to appear. Again, this is not suggesting a sudden stratospheric warming. We'd have to be seeing sort of -40 to be seeing a sudden stratospheric warming, but this is definitely suggesting an attack on the polar vortex and at least a weakening in those zonal winds. Again, signs something could be at play. So we'll have to see what happens over the course of the next few weeks. I'll keep you updated. Again, it's not something we'll have a look at daily, but maybe once or twice a week, or whenever we see significant updates, or if one of the GFS runs shows a proper split in the polar vortex or something like that, then we'll update it again. But it's something we'll have a look at probably once or twice a week for the next few weeks while this takes place, and see if it does come off at all. But it is something we have to keep an eye on, and these sort of charts are the ones we're going to have to keep a very close eye on, as they will start to unfold what will happen. It could be a deal breaker for the second half of winter, as I did say in the winter look-aheads. Definitely do think the second half of winter, so from mid-January onwards, does look generally milder than average from the longer range impacts, but a sudden stratospheric warming is not something you can predict really more than about a month ahead, if that. So, we didn't really be able to tell in the winter look-aheads. But if a sudden stratospheric warming does take place, it could throw all the major climate drivers out of the window and could suggest blocking, even though the typical setup we have at the moment with the La Nina suggesting a colder start to the winter and a milder second half of the winter. So we will have to see what happens. The time being, though, definitely does look like it's mild and westerly, at least for the next week or two, as we'll have a look at in a minute. So if you now generally go on to have a look at what we normally do in the start of the videos and have a look at the live radar, you can see it's a very unsettled day at the moment. A lot of rain around and some significant snow as well over Scotland. Again, not too unusual, coming to low-lying areas within heavier bursts, but it will turn to rain probably over the course of this afternoon. Now, recording this around 2 p.m, you can see big heavy rain moving into the southwest, and that will progress eastwards as well and bring widespread rain through the evening there. Again, it will be hit and miss as it's a weather front. Some areas do perk up, others sort of diminish and fade away, but most areas will see at least a few hours of moderate precipitation this afternoon into the evening. And as I said, snow across Scotland. Now, the temperatures will be increasing with this. It is milder air pushing in. You see very cold still across Scotland as we had that colder air pushing through the end of Christmas Day and yesterday. Many areas actually seeing some winteriness around, but much milder conditions are pushing in with these yellows, symbolic of temperatures most likely around that 10 to 12 degree mark. Now, if you do look at the weather warnings, you can see there is a snow and ice warning issued and an ice warning issued for tomorrow as well. So from 6 p.m. Yesterday until 3 p.m. today, travel disruption is possible from wintry showers, and we are seeing some significant snow at the moment, so perhaps also taking that into account. 1 to 4 centimetres could fall around 100 metres, but before the thaw comes, as soon as it turns to rain or the precipitation stops, maybe 5 to 10 centimetres over the higher ground. Again, high likelihood, lower end of the impact. Again, nothing too unusual for this time of year. If we do go over to tomorrow, have a look, there is an ice warning still issued from 3 p.m. today until 10 a.m. tomorrow. Again, snow looking likely to stop over the course of this evening, but there could be ice where those temperatures still fall to below freezing. And if we do go to the southwest, we've seen a rain warning issued from 2 a.m. tomorrow till 3 p.m. tomorrow, where heavy rain starting to push in. Again, these areas with higher ground seeing relief rainfall, where the moisture increases the rainfall rates here over the hills, and again it could be 40 to 60 millimetres in 9 to 12 hours, so quite heavy rain. And again, going to be quite a few batches of heavy rain around over the next few days, so these rainfall totals really could tot up. If we do go to the UKV now and have a look at the precipitation and the temperature over the course of the next 5 days, now you can see the heavy rain spreading in at the moment, snow over Scotland, but it should move away towards this evening and that heavy rain will spread through for all. As I said, it's turning a bit more patchy through this evening, but most areas will see some light to moderate rain at times before it eventually clears through. And then we see another batch of rain heading through tomorrow morning, giving a very wet start to Wednesday. So not particularly pleasant if you're getting any outdoor plans tomorrow for most of England, Wales and Republic of Ireland to start the day, and that will head northward through the afternoon, giving widespread rain for all, before it could turn slightly drier through around 3 p.m. in the south and the west. That rainfall will eventually clear, and we just see a lot of heavy, blustery showers moving through on Thursday. That could be the best day of this upcoming sort of 3 to 5 day spell with, yes, showers around but slightly dry conditions. But as we head into Friday, more batches of very heavy rain pushing in, and most not really getting away with any drier weather. Could be a bit of line convection there on the cold front for eventually all that heavy rain spreads through. And Saturday, just more batches of heavier rain. Again, I'll have to see the exact timings with this. It can change by a few hours at this time frame, but just more heavy batches of rain. And waking up on the 1st of January, it does look like it'll be another wet, windy, blustery and showery day. No signs of any sustained dry weather in the short time frame. Perhaps longer range though, as we'll look at in a minute. If you go into the wind gusts as well, you'll be able to see we have suggested potentially a named storm. Unless things increase rapidly, I don't think there will be a named storm, but I do definitely think that yellow warnings will be issued, as it does look like we'll see 50, 60, maybe 70 mile per hour gusts as soon as sort of tomorrow afternoon. Around coast especially, maybe inland as well. You can see 50, 60, 70 miles per hour is possible, just these darker reds at times pushing in, giving very strong winds, maybe through Friday afternoon and evening as well, some very strong winds, for eventually it does die down a little bit towards the weekend, but remains fairly blustery, especially towards the coast. So quite a windy, stormy spell coming up, but will we see a named storm? Probably not. From looking at this latest run, but if it did upgrade by maybe 10 to 50 miles per hour, then perhaps, but at this stage, not suggesting that today probably. If we do have a look at the max temperatures, you can see this afternoon still very cold across Scotland, where we hold on to that cold air, but elsewhere 8 to 10 degrees. Into tomorrow afternoon, temperatures once again mild in the south, 10 to 12 degrees, still cold in the north, but milder air will sweep through eventually for all, and by Thursday afternoon it does go slightly colder in the north and west with the cold front spreading through, and then but still slightly around average, really around 7 or 8 degrees in the southeast. For Friday, mild, 10 to 12 degrees in the south, cold in the north. Again, we highlighted this last week, going to be cold in the north, mild in the south, but flip-flopping quite a bit. Some days, the next sort of 5 days, it'll be 6 or 7 in the south, other days it could be 12. And as we head towards Saturday afternoon, 12 degrees in the southeast, freezing in the north, and that continues into early January. Now, if we do go over to have a look at the GFS over the course of the next few weeks, see what that is showing. Again, a westerly flow generally at the moment, quite unsettled, deep low pressure systems moving in, and eventually, in the longer term, higher pressure tries to move in, and it doesn't initially do much, but it does push that storm track further northwards and keeps us slightly more settled in at least the south and the east. And in the longer range, the low pressure eventually tries to win out, and it kind of does in the longer range, and we go back again quite unsettled and stormy. But it has a go at higher pressure, signs of higher pressure here, but again, nothing spectacular, generally quite westerly all the way around the 10th of January. If we look at the GEM, see how that does compare. Again, low pressure involved at the moment, remaining very unsettled generally before higher pressure tries to build in, but at day 10, we're sort of on the cusp. High pressure could start to build in, a bit of higher pressure towards Svalbard and Scandinavia, trying to pull an easterly wind into Eastern Europe. You see the upper air temperatures here, cold air flooding back, but no imminent signs of that at all here. Generally, this is relatively mild with a southerly wind, but that high pressure is poised to go somewhere. We'll have to see what happens to it, though. If we do go have a look at the ECMWF, again, a westerly wind at the moment, stays very unsettled, but as I said at the start of the video, watch what happens. High pressure builds towards Scandinavia and actually starts to pull an easterly wind in. Again, not majorly cold yet, but it's poised at very cold conditions. The ECMWF here would go very cold around that 6th to 10th of January point with bitterly cold easterly winds, and that would turn us very cold and potentially snowy as well. Again, it's not a major blocking system, as it's still very cold over the North Pole with locked in low pressure systems, but the potential is there. We'll just have to see if it does come off. I'll see in the ensembles in a minute. There are a few runs going like this, but not many. If we do have a look at those ensemble members, then you can see generally up and down, above and below average over the course of the next week or so. Very unsettled with big precipitation spikes at times, indicating quite low pressure. Longer term, slightly drier conditions coming in, perhaps signs of high pressure, but generally we're above average in terms of upper air temperatures. And look at a few of those runs around the 8th to 12th of January point, going very cold, down to -5 or lower. Those are the ones showing easterly winds. I've had a look at those individually, and they are easterly winds, but there are very few going for that, maybe 5 at most. So not particularly high chance of that, but it is something that's there, and we can't discount it at this stage. If we have a look at the ECMWF ensemble members, very similar, up and down, above and below, but generally above average. And then in the longer range, you can actually see really only one run properly going for easterly winds. But of course, the ECMWF operational one would probably follow that with very cold conditions, but it doesn't run out to day 14 on the ensemble charts. But it does turn very unsettled before turning slightly drier, but that drier signal is not as particularly pronounced as it was a few days ago, or from the GFS ensembles. So maybe signs of that high pressure that go at building in, but doesn't really properly do it, and we stay fairly unsettled. So yeah, next few weeks it's looking generally unsettled, generally milder than average, but then those temperatures will flip-flop depending on the cold fronts and warm fronts. The models are potentially suggesting higher pressure towards the middle of the month, maybe around the 10th, but again, there's not huge signs of that yet. It's still in the extended range, and still not too many runs going for it. But of course, today we've very much concentrated on that sudden stratospheric warming, so that is something that could take place in the second half of the month, and of course I'll keep you updated on that over the course of the next few weeks. But for the time being, make sure you enjoy the rest of the year. Of course, it's bank holiday today, so I hope you're enjoying that, and of course the rest of the festive period as well. As we head into 2023, it's going to remain unsettled, potentially quite stormy as well, so make sure you stay safe out there, as it could be quite wild at times. So anyway, thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you again for another video soon.